Welcome back to Fixing Furniture. Why does furniture break and why do you care? Well, if you're a general woodworker or a furniture maker or even working in furniture repair, it's important to understand why furniture breaks. It's something that can help you understand how to build something better and how to repair something the proper way. I've got an industry expert joining me today, so I'll fire up Zoom and we'll get started. So welcome, Gene. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, I'm glad to be here.
And Gene, you're known as the Wood Doctor. Tell our audience why that is.
I've been writing articles for a magazine called FDM, and then they changed their name to FDMC, called Ask the Wood Doctor. And I've been doing this for nigh onto 40 years, and it's just something I love to do.
We're going to go through the 10 reasons why furniture breaks. And we're going to do this in David Letterman style, so we're going to count down to what we feel are the top ones near the end. So we're going to start with number 10. The first one we've got here is drying wood. Now, if you're building furniture or you're fixing furniture, your mind might be far away from thinking about drying wood. Why don't you tell us, Gene, why drying wood is so important in woodworking?
We can dry wood in various ways and affect its machinability, its gluability, its flatness, all those behavioral attitudes in wood are influenced by how the wood is dried. And even if we don't dry it, whoever we got the wood from, somebody had to dry the wood. If they didn't, the moisture in the wood would leave in the house, in the office, wherever the wood is, right, and it would dry naturally. And when it dries naturally, it would shrink. Just as a kind of a rule of thumb, wood shrinks about, let's say, 10% when it goes from green in the tree to dry in the house. So drying is really important. And here's the key. We want to dry the wood to the same moisture content that it will have when it's in use.
Right.
For the hardwood lumber, we want to get it about 7% moisture content. Softwoods, we want to dry them to about 10% moisture content, no drier, because if we dry softwoods drier and then send it in the planer or whatever, we're going to get a lot of chipped grain, which means we'll have to use a lot of putty or a lot of sanding to get that surface smooth and everything. So softwoods are but the good news is even though they're a little bit on the wet side, they don't shrink and swell as much as hardwoods. So we aren't going to see so many problems. So that's kind of two rules of thumb on softwoods and hardwoods. But if you over dry it, the wood gets brittle.
Yeah, I wonder if that's some of what I'm seeing in furniture that's coming outside of, so I'm in Canada. I've seen some flat pack furniture that's been brought in. I'm repairing some pieces that are only a couple years old, and it seems like the wood is just shattering. And maybe that's why. Maybe it's been over dried.
Absolutely. Because once it's over dried, even though I bring the moisture back up, and it's summertime and it's back up to say 9% moisture content, the brittleness happened way back when it was over dried, and it doesn't leave. And that's too bad. Because it's a man-made error, not a tree-made error.
So number 10 is drying wood. And I guess the key actions here, if you're building furniture, is buy quality wood from a reputable supplier. And if you're a consumer, buying furniture from a quality furniture maker. I do have some furniture samples here. This is a chair that I've pulled apart with a leg snapped off. And I think, Gene, this is an example of a piece that is brittle. Let's take a look at a video I shot when I uncovered this chair to take a look at the problem. Well, this is interesting. There's a crack here in the wood. There's a crack up here in the wood. This is really brittle material. I'll strip off the rest of this fabric and we'll see what's going on with the rest of the frame. Now that I can see the full frame here, in addition to the cracks over here, I also see a split here. And look how long the split is. It goes from here all the way to here. The long grain is where it should be the strongest, and this piece has a long split all the way along here. an unexplained split from what I'm used to from North American woods. So purchasing quality furniture really does come down to purchasing from quality makers.
It's like when we split firewood, the split will follow the grain. And in the old days, when they made furniture, they would split a log before they sawed it. And that would tell them the grain angle, and then they would saw parallel to the split.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Curtis Buchanan. He's a Windsor chairmaker, and I've watched his videos, and he actually starts by splitting wood, and he's using a draw knife and a spoke shave, and he's doing everything with the grain. It's really fascinating to watch him work.
Yeah, and when they make a $5,000 pool cue, they split the grains so that pool cue will stay perfectly straight no matter what happens to the moisture.
Yeah.
By the way, moisture is the only reason that wood changes its size or shape, not temperature. Like metal, it expands and contracts with temp. Wood doesn't do that. It's only moisture content.
Okay.
So that's why we're so interested in getting drying, number 10, done correctly.
So the wood species that you choose when you're making furniture has a bearing on how strong the wood is or how likely it is to break, right? I wouldn't, for example, try to make a part of a Windsor chair that's this thin out of something like pine, right?
Right, like white pine, say, which was a pretty common furniture wood, only has about 1/3 the strength of oak. It's not quite true, but in terms of legs, you can make a skinny leg out of oak, but you have to have a leg 3 times bigger to get the same strength out of white pine, eastern white pine. Screws and staples and nails are the same way. We might get, say, 20 pounds of holding power on a small brad that we stick into white pine, but on oak, we can get 63 times more holding power on a nail. It's the same size nail, the same distance, all that sort of stuff's the same. Only difference is the wood. It's in 3 times. So yeah, species is so important in breakage, because it's 3 times harder to break oak. Yeah. Now, if oak does break, of course, then you say, whoa, good thing I didn't use pine. It would have been worse.
Yeah. Okay, so species is important. So the action here would be, if you're building furniture, use the appropriate species for what you're building. Now, if someone's looking to figure out the strength of the wood species, you talk in great detail in FDM magazine about wood. Where would someone go to figure out how strong a species of wood is?
Oh, that's really a hard question, but it's a great question. The wood handbook is highly technical, but it has the information.
Okay. I've also used the wood database, an online resource to look up woods.
The wood database is really nicely done and has the same information, but it's perhaps a little more concise than the wood handbook. So that's probably a better option for many people. Yeah.
Okay. So let's move on to number 8, grain orientation. You've already alluded to this. Grain orientation being an important part for furniture makers because it can cause failure. Take a look at this video that I shot. This is a chair where a stretcher had broken, and you can see the severe angle of the grain. So when enough pressure was applied on that stretcher, it just snapped. If that grain was straight across that stretcher, it wouldn't have broken.
The fact is, if we make 2x4s or 2x6s for a house and everything, they look at the grain on every one of those pieces. And if the grain is too sloped, it loses grade. It doesn't have the strength that they're wanting.
Okay.
So it is a factor for construction timber where strength is really important. Most furniture doesn't have super high strength requirements, but slope of grain, it's just a small slope of grain angle and the strength starts to go way down. Got to be real aware of the sloped grain, and the grain. The only way we can do that is to follow a split, because the growth rings we see on a piece, that doesn't necessarily reflect the grain angle that it has.
Okay, that's good to know.
But now again, if you go to a good sawmill that's supplying good lumber and it's dried well by a good supplier, even though it might cost a little more, you're going to get a better product out of it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like sound advice. Yeah. Okay, so the next one is number 7. This is added stress in wood. So this is what the furniture maker's doing.
If you have a sharp pointed fastener, that fastener will go into wood like a chisel kind of,
Right.
and it will spread the fibers apart, which again is creating like a little stress spot. You know, wood is really weak in splitting. Think about if you've split firewood, how easy it is with a hammer and a little wedge to hit it a couple of times in this huge, try and split a 24-inch log into two 12-inch pieces using the same wedge and a hammer. You can't split it that way, but you can split it lengthwise. And
Right.
so wood is really weak of all the properties it has. Wood is great except for this splitting. So once you start a little split with a sharp pointed fastener, be it a screw, a brad, a staple, whatever, and you push the fibers aside so the metal can get in there, I think everybody knows how easy it is to put a nail near the end and tap it in and oh no.
Yeah, yeah. I do have a piece here that I wanted to show you. So this is standard furniture joinery for flat pack furniture. And so this is a square leg, and it's chamfered here at the edge. This is where insert nuts go, or T-nuts. So they go in there so that the customer can then put a bolt in and tighten it up. I've repaired a number of these in my workshop over the last couple of years where the wood around it has broken. This construction technique I'm finding, where there are no stretchers between these legs, failing a fair bit. Someone moving a heavy chair on carpet, there's a ton of stress, and it's just focused on that little area, and the wood just breaks out.
That's a great sample that you have there, and a good explanation.
The next one on the list is number 6. And this is not added stress in wood, but natural stress in wood. I've got an example here of a piece of maple. This is a slice off of a board. So this is end grain, and I'll bring this close to the camera, and you can see the twisting. And I've hung on to this for a number of years just to show that this very thin piece of wood, there was a lot of stress in it, right?
Yeah. And you know, just think about it. How heavy does a tree? A tree is ungodly heavy sitting there, and all this weight comes down to the stem down here, and all the branches, and then there's a snow load or an ice load or whatever. I mean, man, is there ever the stress on that wood in that stem part that we're hauling off to the sawmill to get made into lumber? And then if the tree couldn't get light right up here, it decided to curve a little bit. So now we have a curvy log that we're going to try and saw straight lumber out of. And of course, that isn't going to work, but it's got stress in it like crazy. And we have like a lot of species of eucalypts. You know, we don't have eucalypts much in the United States, but they do, like, say, in South Africa or Australia.
Okay.
That has so much stress in it when they cut the tree down and look at the end of the tree, they got 3 cracks. You can actually hear it cracking as it's falling down because of all the stress in the wood. And that stays in the wood. I mean, some of it is relieved, but it's still there in the wood.
I get reminders of stress in wood when I go to pick out 2x4s at the lumberyard.
Oh yeah.
And
right.
As a Canadian, we describe these as hockey sticks. You know, a piece of lumber that just has such a curve in it. As it's drying out, it's, you know, construction lumber is a little more moist than what you normally would use for furniture. But as it's drying out, it gets packed flat. But then you see these boards that you want nowhere in anything you're constructing.
Well, I'll give you a rule of thumb. Lumber sawn within about 15 growth rings of the center of the log will have quite a bit of stress in it.
Oh.
As we go beyond 15 growth rings or 15 years, then that stress disappears. And the stress isn't just straight stress, it's spiral stress. So like the piece that you showed us, you know, it's spirally. And that's what's characteristic of lumber from the core of a log. Those are pieces that you don't want. You don't want to get real close to the center of the log is called the pith, P-I-T-H. You don't want to get real close to the pith because you just aren't going to get good wood.
I'll just hold this up here for our viewers to get the idea of, so this right here is the pith. So stay away from the wood that's within 15 growth rings. So you're talking, this is a small piece of wood. You wouldn't really make lumber out of something so small. I kept this for a turning that I was doing, and I sealed the end of it, thinking I had prevented it from splitting, but obviously it didn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress there that's natural in the tree. You can tell if you got a piece close to that, of course, because when you look at the end grain of a piece of lumber, you'll see the curvature is really sharp, really steep.
Oh, okay.
And you prefer it to having flatter. I mean, you can use that, but you run the risk that the piece is going to move in the furniture, and 3 legs will touch the floor, but not the 4th leg or stuff like that.
Fair enough. So advice on natural stress in wood. What would your advice be for people that are not necessarily repairing furniture, but maybe making furniture?
Don't use any lumber that isn't straight and flat,
Okay.
Because that's indicating to you that there's some stress, and that stress will, let's just say that it's got so much stress that it's using up half of the strength of the wood. So that only leaves you half of the strength left for your leg or tabletop or whatever you're going to be doing. That's the other problem. Not only does it warp and that sort, but it means that we're working with a piece that the usable strength to us is half of what we were anticipating. So now that 2-inch leg, which works most of the time, won't work.
Be sure to go to our website and subscribe to our newsletter for links to new videos, workshop tips, and more. Now back to fixing furniture.
So number 5 on our list is something that I've found not a lot of people are familiar with, but it's absolutely critical. So it's sort of in the middle of our list. It's called wood movement. So Gene, you've talked a little bit about wood movement.
Wood only moves because its moisture changes. And the moisture changes because the humidity changes.
I've got a few examples of videos where wood movement wasn't taken into account when furniture was repaired, and therefore it broke. Wood movement happens across the grain here. So this expands and contracts. There's very little that happens this direction, so you can disregard that. But here on this large panel, this needs to be able to move freely. Otherwise, you can have something happen like this. At the bottom here, the cracking is even worse. So this is the break here, but you can see here, there's a split that's starting. You can see back here, there's a split that's starting. So there's likely something underneath here that's also holding it in place. When this was repaired, someone put a block across the grain, and that prevented the wood from moving. If we take a close look at the break here, you can see that there's solid glue here on the bottom and on the top, which makes me think there's been at least a second repair here with someone thinking they needed to glue it together. Wood movement is important for woodworkers to understand, because if you don't respect that wood moves, you're really in trouble.
Well, if you put an oak floor in a house, you go over to the molding and you'll see there's a gap there if it's wintertime and the whole floor is floating. Or if you go to a basketball court, say, you will see the basketball court will shrink and swell by depending on the humidity. And we even had one in Virginia where they had a pipe break, and that swelled up the floor so much it actually pushed the one wall off the foundation. So
wow.
We can now. So that, what does that mean? It means keep water away from the wood, because water will take the moisture up to 30%. Or I mean, it really it makes wood move like crazy.
Let's look at another video that shows wood movement. I've just picked up this table from a customer, and my job is to rebuild the tabletop. Now, this tabletop has been destroyed by at least 2 repairs as far as I can tell. The reason is because those repairs didn't take into account wood movement. The original piece was built with blocks securing the top here and here, and the one back here was flexible. Now, wood doesn't move along the grain, it moves across the grain. So the original craftsmen that put this together understood that. They anchored the table here where there's a seam and we can put leaves in it. But over here, they made a flexible attachment that would allow this whole tabletop to move back and forth. Someone decided to put nails almost every 4 inches all the way around the table, and this is the pile of finishing nails I pulled out. Because there's so much wood on tabletops, a small percentage of change does make a big difference in that movement.
One of the secrets when you're doing that is not to tighten the screws too tight that are holding everything, and to put them in holes that are oval shaped. So then when the tabletop says, hey, I want to move, the screw head you don't have it so tight that it can't move. And so the screw head will move back and forth in the oval holes. I'll tell you that when people call me from manufacturing facilities, big commercial, 3 out of 4 times they have a moisture problem. The moisture has created movement of some sort that has created the problem they have.
So number 4 on our list, we're down to defects. So I've got a piece of this wood that's broken off, and let me show it to you on a video clip so you can see it up close. You can see there's a knot. So there were 2 things you alluded to, right? One is knots might be beautiful, but in the right spot, they cause a problem. And here's an issue, that the grain orientation has actually changed around that knot, making that leg weak, right?
You got it. Boy, I'll give you A+ for that.
All right. You also mentioned to me when we were talking earlier about a split board and a split end. I've got a sample here of, this was a rough piece of lumber that came from the lumberyard this way, and so I cut this off as part of the waste. But the thing that I wasn't aware of that you mentioned was, if there does happen to be some splits here, let's just say it was 1.5 inches and there was some split, if I cut off the 1.5 inches because I want to use the rest as good wood, there's no guarantee that there actually isn't more splitting going on there, right?
When we dry lumber, some people don't put a coating on the end, and so we get little cracks on the ends of the board when it's being dried. And those cracks go, like you say, 2 inches or whatever. And when you cut it off, you look really closely and you have good lighting and you cut it off. Many times that crack actually it's very small at that point and very tight. You can't see it, but it's there. And remember, okay, wood is really weak in splitting failure. So if you get a little stress from a fastener that's right there, say, or a planer knife coming over and hitting it and all, it can grow. With white pine, I've seen the stress like that go from nothing to like 4 feet in a piece of white pine when it went through a planer. So
wow,
these defects, you have to really, and some people say, oh, I cut the knots out. Yeah, but what about the cross grain around those knots, which doesn't glue very well, by the way. But, you know, the defect is more than that little red spot or whatever color the knot is.
Yeah.
You know, it's where the grain is affecting us.
So we're now down to the top 3 reasons why furniture breaks.
Oh, you want me to play that on the horn?
Number 3. So glue failure. Now, I've seen this in a number of different pieces, and you saw that in the cabinet I showed earlier. The glue line had split where the cabinet came apart, and that had come apart before the grain was starting to break on either side of that separation. Glue can fail for a number of reasons, and I've talked about that with Tom Johnson on another video. But from your experience, glue failure, how would you describe it?
Yeah, well, first let me say that Tom Johnson's video that you made is really awesome.
Oh, thank you.
It's very concise, accurate, everything. It's beautiful and very practical. So I encourage people to look at that. But glue failure the glue normally is 1.5 times stronger than the wood itself. All our woodworking adhesives that we use is stronger than the wood. So a glue joint should never fail. So if the glue joint fails, it means you did something wrong. And
okay,
what you normally do wrong is you have a surface, but you planed it 3 months ago or something like that. And the surface has these chemical magnets that want to attract to the glue, but there was no glue for the last 3 months. So, oh, here comes a dust particle and it grabbed hold of that. And oh, here comes a water molecule, it grabbed hold of that. And so now when you put the glue on it, there's no place for the glue to attach. I know chemical magnets it's an analogy. I'm not talking about real magnets, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
So we encourage people to glue stuff together, especially if you want strength, within 15 minutes after you prepare that surface.
Okay.
And if the surface is older than 15 minutes, get a piece of sandpaper, maybe 100 weight, 120 something, and take one swipe across that surface to reactivate it so that everything can attach. And the other thing happens with old stuff is maybe the moisture changes and the piece changes size or twists a little. So now when you put the two pieces together, they have to fit within 6/1000ths of an inch if you want a super strong glue joint. 6/1000ths. I mean, that's teeny weeny, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, you don't want it under 2/1000ths because then you'll squeeze out the glue and there won't be enough to do what glue does. Too much pressure then can squeeze out too much. Having an inactive surface is another.
And to clarify, the gluing you're talking about is edge to edge versus a mortise and tenon?
No, it's the same rule. If you have a mortise and tenon that fits super duper tight and you put some glue in there, the glue probably is doing very little work for you. If you have a little bit looser, not real loose, I mean, but it's a little bit looser joint, and that's why we put grooves in the dowels. Have you noticed that?
Mm-hmm.
That's one to relieve pressure, but it's also to get the glue in some areas where it will be this 2/1000ths to 6/1000ths inch and hold better.
Okay.
In biscuits, it's even more. In biscuits are only positioners. The strength we get out of a biscuit is not that much compared to strength along the whole piece.
Okay.
But again, the rules on fresh surfaces apply if it's face to face. The only thing we can't glue is end grain.
Right.
It just doesn't glue. It's like taking a whole bunch of soda straws and trying to glue a bunch of soda straws to another bunch of soda straws and all those hollow spots and everything. It doesn't work. And that's why we have all those fancy fasteners when we have two pieces meeting at an end grain. The main thing is if it fails, something is not right. And glue does not dry out over the 10 years. You know, a lot of people say, oh, the glue dried out. After about 24 hours, glue is going to be the same way 100 years from now. Glue doesn't dry out, the wood dries out.
Yeah.
And each time the wood dries out, it maybe cracks a little bit more and eventually it falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I'm repairing antiques, I notice the high glue is it shatters when you touch it with a chisel. So for chairs, for example, that movement in the chair eventually loosens it up. In terms of larger furniture, I pull apart pieces that are loose. And I guess that's why, is because of the wood movement over decades would put stress on that glue. Okay, so let's move on to number 2. We're almost near the end of the list here. This is use and abuse of furniture. So I've seen a number of pieces come through my shop. The one thing that really, I guess, puzzles me is that people think that if they lean on the back of a chair, the chair is going to survive. I've seen so many broken chairs with that. People putting stresses on a piece of furniture that it wasn't designed for. Also, standing on a chair can put significant stress on a portion of the chair that it's not meant for. You might think, well, it's a human body. Well, a person sitting on a chair is significantly different than a person standing with 2 feet on a corner of a chair. Again, you're asking for a disaster. Please don't stand on your chairs. Use a step stool. But use and abuse of furniture is where I see a lot of repairs that are coming through my shop, and why I put that as number 2 on the list. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you actually said it pretty well. I mean, furniture is designed to do certain things, and when we begin to use it for purposes like a ladder or a step stool that it wasn't designed for, we're really pushing the limits of wood and its behavior. Again, the key is if there were no moisture change, we would have a better product, even if it is abused. And it's that cycling the bigger moisture changes that over time accumulate some looseness, a fastener that isn't tight anymore, and so on.
Part of what I classify in this as well is where you've got a loose piece of furniture that you don't repair. A loose chair, for example, will turn into a broken chair. And the hints for that are a little bit of movement, but also sound. If you start to hear squeaks, it's time to repair it. If you go much further, you might end up with a broken piece of furniture.
Absolutely. It's trying to tell you something. It's just we don't understand the language.
That's right. Our number one reason here why furniture breaks. Can you guess what it is? It's design. Furniture design. So if you think about what Gene and I have talked about here, there's a number of these elements that need to be put in place the right way for that furniture design to work. The grain orientation, wood movement. It's, I think, really important for furniture designers, furniture makers to understand these principles. And I think a lot of them do, but there are some that I've seen flaws come into my workshop where I'm repairing something. So it's important to understand properly designed furniture, I think, when repairing furniture, so you can look at it, diagnose what went wrong, and hopefully you can correct that and get that back to the customer in working order. One thing I see a lot is flat packed furniture. So pieces that come to my shop like this, they're put together with mechanical fasteners. The customer puts them together. From what I've seen, if you want a really quality piece of furniture, have it put together by a craftsman, not by the homeowner.
If we're going to connect two pieces of wood, and you showed the one where we had some mechanical fasteners that would go in and so on, we need to think about the stress that might be occurring in joining two pieces of wood together. Not always does the table leg break, but oftentimes it's the joint. And so we need to be really careful that we're doing things that are appropriate for the joint. A library shelf, is strong enough to hold the books. And I mean, there's just a whole raft of cases where design is, using maybe a formula or something is fine, but we also have to then look at the wood itself to make sure that we don't have cross grain, that we don't have a knot in the middle of something that has to carry a high load and so on.
Right.
So, and at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what sort of finish do you want? You want it super smooth. Like if you have a big table, you want it really nice and smooth. You don't want to see lumps and bumps and everything. So there's a lot more to furniture design than just making a blueprint drawing.
Right.
And that's where the craftsman really comes into this woodworking business, is that with knowledge like they get on this video and your other videos that you have, they'll be able to start to make some wise decisions.
Right.
That'll put me out of business because then I won't get questions for my wood doctor column. But after 40 years, I guess I should slow down maybe. Yeah, I tell you, I get questions. I get plenty of questions. And the reason is usually is a poor understanding of wood and moisture.
I hope you enjoyed the session today with Gene. He's been a great guest here to share his knowledge with us. I've learned a few new things in here about why furniture breaks that I wasn't aware of. So thank you for sharing your advice and your wisdom. And I'll continue to read your articles in FDMC magazine. You've been writing for over 40 years, and that's really inspiring. So thank you again, Gene. This has been a great session.
Thank you.
For those of you who haven't subscribed to our channel, you can click over here and click on the bell icon, and you'll get notified every time we publish a video. Thanks for watching Fixing Furniture.